And so we'll show you why. So again, I want to welcome you to the presentation today called Use Commanding Strategies, which is what we call a sustainable competitive advantage to dominate the competition. And as you all know, I'm a teacher, both here in the United States and in China. And so I always try to give an agenda of where we're going, which is good presentation format, and also walk you through some fundamentals. And we're going to do that in this case before we talk about some of the companies. So today's hot expression is about purpose. Simon Sinek, you may be knowing, did a great TED presentation a while ago on it. It's a very important issue. And every company needs to know from the company point of view, from the customer point of view, from the employee point of view, what is the purpose of our business, but understand that's not strategy. Strategy is a systematic means to an end, and so that's what we're going to focus on. How do we accomplish that purpose? By having a strategy. A commanding strategy is a very special class. It's a sustainable competitive advantage that you can have over your competition so that so people come to you rather than your competition, or will stay with you rather than leaving for your competition. So it's a long-term strategy rather than a short-term tactic, which unfortunately is what many companies do. Today's day and age, if you're one of the burger giants and you've been selling it for $1.29 and someone else comes out at $1 and says, there's our tactic to get people to come to us. We're going to be 29 cents cheaper. We'll be the low-cost provider. They think it's a great idea, except the next morning the other company announces the same thing. So it's clearly not going to give them a competitive advantage long-term. And more important, now the two of them are in a pricing war. So these are the things you want to avoid by doing effective planning and figuring out where you want to go. So with that, let's take a look at it. So purpose, as I said, isn't strategy. And so to get to the strategy, let's try to understand it. There are many different components in here. What I want to do is just walk you through it. So and this is very important. I work with a lot of CEOs who don't really get it, only because many of the previous teachers of these things are not doing a good job. A vision is the impact that you expect to have on the world. So when Microsoft first came along and it realized you could build a piece of software that could be put on anybody's desktop, its concept was that it wanted to be able to be in that desktop and therefore to have a computer on every desktop using Microsoft software. Google wants to be the default search engine. Anybody wants to know information, they can get it. Facebook's vision is that people get up in the morning and they want to know what's happening in the world, and they go to Facebook, whether they're looking for social information, news information, business information. Their goal increasingly is adding more components to that. So it's the vision of where you see the world. Companies like Tesla, their vision was to see a world maybe 100 years from now where we're not burning fossil fuels, and instead we're using electric engines in really beautiful cars. The mission has to do really with what the employees are all about. So not the headline, which is the vision that you read in a newspaper. It's the mission is what it is that's driving everybody to get up early in the morning or whenever to do your work. So it's why we go to work. So take an example of Starbucks. Starbucks opens many of its offices as early as 6 in the morning, which means that the baristas and everybody else is going to be there getting up at 3, 4 in the morning to be able to get ready, get to work, get the stuff set up so when your first client walks in at 6, you're there. Their mission is to do all the things necessary to provide the customers with a great coffee experience to get them started and have a wonderful day, including the ability for them to be able to come back and buy additional coffee during the day or get other things that they're looking for. It's an example. Southwest Airlines happens to be a low-cost provider, one of the best low-cost providers, but their mission is built around that. Our mission is to provide a low-cost airline that provides a great flying experience within that concept. And it's interesting because what they do therefore is when people come and say, you know what, we could upgrade our peanuts to almonds, or we could offer a different kind of meal. The first thing everyone does is, what's our mission? To provide customers with a low-cost provider that makes it a good experience, and therefore it's very clear what's acceptable and not. Within that mission, you're now going to set goals. Okay, so what is it specifically we want to do? So you might be in a business where you're looking at 2016. I'm doing that right now with all my CEOs who are part of my Vistage group, my own personal coaching practice, and those companies, public and private, that are bringing me in for what we call strategic leadership advances. We don't believe management should ever retreat. So in an SLA, we sit down and lay out the goals for next year. What are the changes that need to be made in roles? How do we get there? How do we measure it, etc. So one might be we're going to increase sales 20%, 27%. Now, great companies understand that goal really usually consists of sub goals or objectives. And so here's an example of how it might be done. I want to increase my sales by 27%. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to get 10% more new customers. But I'm also going to work with my existing companies, whoever I have, and increase their size by 7%. We're going to upsell them something. And what I might also do is encourage people who are buying to buy by an additional 10%. Because when they come back twice or 3 or 4 times, the cost of getting them to buy the second, third, fourth time is cheaper than that first time. Plus, if it's an online purchase, it's an advantage because they've already got maybe their information, including the credit card or everything stored, so it becomes easier. So with one click with Amazon, for example, it's real easy to order almost every day whatever you're looking for, and with Prime, you don't worry about delivery. Those all together are the specific ways I want to achieve that goal, and I can be measured by each one for them. Now, one of the things we all know, and Peter Drucker made this famous, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's how people feel about the organization and about achieving their strategy and about their own work that's critical to implementing whatever vision, mission, goal, objectives you have and the strategy for achieving them. And so one of the things you need to do before you get to the strategy is what are the fundamental goals? So if you're Starbucks, for example, Starbucks said we're going to give healthcare to anyone who's even a half-time worker. Why? Because that's something we want people to know we care about. Contrast that to people who don't hire employees, who are only using freelancers, and therefore farming them out essentially so they don't have to deal with unemployment taxes, Social Security, and healthcare. Teamwork might be one, and teamwork can be defined in many ways. That if anyone needs help, we're going to give it, or it could be proactive. And in a proactive, it's where people say, you know what, you look like you're suffering through this. Can I help you? Okay, so the standards that I look for are people who are working in a department at the end of the day. So have they noticed anything where they can help other people? A final value might be innovation. There are companies like 3M, Google that excel at encouraging people to use innovation. If you attended our program, I think it was the third program on October 28th, which is called Lead the Innovative Organization. How do you do it? Many, many different models today that exist on how to effectively create a culture of innovation. So if you've done all of this, now you're ready to say, okay, what's our best strategy for succeeding? How do we get those means to achieve the ends we're looking for? And the key here is to understand that it involves really this, a process of obtaining resources, all those different resources you can use, all the capabilities of your staff, all of the tools that they're going to use, the capital they're going to need, and then mobilizing them, the throughput, putting it together in a way that you can achieve the corporate purpose. Now, to get there means you need to look at what available resources are there that I can use, how might I grab them, how might I use them, etc. And then how do I form not just an efficient model, but also an effective model. So as we focus people on this, there are really 5 areas you want to look at. One is external analysis. What's happening in the world? What are my competitors doing? How are resources happening? So, for example, I work with a lot of companies, and I ask them right now as we look at in 2016, what are your 3 biggest challenges? And almost 50% of the time, one of the 3 biggest challenges is sourcing, finding qualified people that they can bring into the company. So the talent pool, making sure that it's there, is part of an external analysis. Internal is what are we good at? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What can we do better? What can we not do? So if everyone's in a silo, they're only working on that department's work. But if my value is teamwork, I want them to work cross silos across the company to see the bigger picture. And so the internal analysis says, how do I do that? How do I find out what products and services are going to be able to be most effective in selling to customers for my people to learn, to master, etc. The third part is the differentiation decision. When you finally take whatever it is out to your market, how are you differentiating yourself? We'll see basically three models out there. Finally, you need to implement what you're doing. Okay. All of the best ideas, if not implemented, don't work. Larry Bossidy many years ago co-wrote a book called Execution. It's the classic on it, highly recommended. It's all about performance at the end of the day. You can plan to run or swim or win a basketball game, but until you actually do it, it's a different ball game. And then what you do, you want to evaluate and use the feedback from the evaluation to improve. And I will tell you that one of our goals, one of our cultural elements, one of our key values is to make sure that everyone understands it's all about continuous improvement. How to help every employee, every freelancer who's working with our company, every vendor grow in a way that helps everybody. So what you give gets better and better. And so that's a value we have. So let's go through some of this quickly now. In external analysis, you're looking at things that affect my business: technology, economics, demographics, globalization, the virtual workforce, cultural shifts. I mean, these are things we see all the time. 10 years ago, we didn't have the level of mobile devices we have now, and that's changed everything. It means people can be in touch no matter where they are, in terms of how they're doing it. They can provide information back and forth. They can check in on people. They can find additional information. Technology, as we all know, is totally changing our world, and we need to adjust accordingly. So if you're still using paper forms and it should be online, you need to be able to do it. Related to that, it's something I'm working with a team right now on, is we're watching many companies who've taken paper evaluation forms that they gave out at the end of a program, and they're saying instead just go to this link and do it online. And what they find is less than 20% of the people actually do that. So while it is cheaper than cutting down trees, and it does take up less time from the meeting, the reality of it is people aren't using it. So technology is an aid, but how it's used by people is the real external analysis. Second is economics. We're just coming through a recession. Hopefully, we're getting out slowly and surely. If you watch the market in the last 2 days, it's been down again. Clearly, the whole world is being buffeted back and forth by all these different economic winds. Demographics is totally changing. We're working with a really exciting new company right now that's focusing on people who are the fastest growing demographic population in the United States and in the world. China, Europe, etc., has the same thing, and these are people 60 years to 100 years old. This older group is growing faster, and the United States is actually bigger than millennials already. And the question is, how is that going to change your economy? How's that going to change your business model? And that's what this new work company we're working with does. Globalization, it's this ability in a flat world to be able to work no matter where you are, in part by using virtual workforces, in part by thinking larger scale. If you follow mergers and acquisitions, this year's been a record of them, and you have just today another one announced with DuPont is involved with one of them. The Ambev deal that looked like it was going through has been stopped. All of this is part of what's happening in the trends, and it's because the fundamentals of running a business require changes, and as the market changes, these companies realize they need to change what they're doing. And there's significant cultural shifts. So a perfect example was the desire to lower manufacturing costs and customer services costs, moved people from providing services, manufacturing, customer service in America to offshore. But after many years of people being very unhappy with the fact that offshore people were not providing the high quality, the culture said, I won't work with you then, and moved a lot of that coming back, at least in terms of customer service. Dell was one of the first to move it out and to move it back. This concept of understanding those forces leads to something that Michael Porter, who's a guru in strategy, works over at Harvard, focuses on. And he says you need to understand all five of these variables to really understand what a company can do and should do. And here's an example. What it's doing is you're looking at in an industry. So let's just take an example, airlines. You have rivalry between different competitors, and as we've seen, many have become few right now. But there's always a threat of a substitute. But there's a threat, top one, of a new entrant. So Virgin Atlanta, Virgin America, these airlines didn't exist 25 years ago, have now come in and become there. Southwest, JetBlue, all of these companies coming out and existing. These very often their niche is that they're low cost, so you have to watch for them. They've affected the industry. Threat of substitutes. If the answer is it takes too long to get in and out of an airport, too much time to get through an airport. Sometimes if you're going, let's say, from New York to Boston or to Washington, D.C., the substitute, which might be a faster Amtrak train, might do the trick. The two things that are going to affect your business are going to be the power of the supplier. Okay, can they raise their prices on you, or can they lower their prices? Today, the commodity prices are down, and the power of those suppliers has dropped. The bargaining power, on the other hand, of the buyers is increased. They're constantly looking for lower and lower costs. I heard, and I may have this statistic wrong, but I heard today someone did an analysis of how much business was lost in America when Walmart many years ago decided to do its manufacturing offshore. And I think that number was something like $421 billion. Just think of the impact that's had over many of these years. So you want to look at these forces that are affecting the industry and affecting your company. Then from an internal point of view, as you look at all of this, you say, well, what can we do about it? What are our strengths and how can we build on them? What are our weaknesses and can we compensate for them or even eliminate them? Or are we just going to leave them alone and see if we can work without them? And then the question is, once we've done that, how does that let us take advantage of an opportunity or a threat? And there's two ways of approaching this. This is what I'm giving you is the classic way. Find your strengths, your weaknesses, and then think what your opportunities and threats are and how you're going to work with them. I'm right now training my students to work a different way. First, start off with the business opportunities. What could be done? What are the threats? Okay, so if there's a giant player in your industry, that's a threat that they could come in and copy what you do and gobble you up and destroy you. So you have to ask from then what are the opportunities and strengths, threats, what are your strengths to be able to capitalize on opportunities, to hold off the threats? And what are your weaknesses? Can you really take on that opportunity? So if you're a company that's stretched from a cash flow point of view or you're overstretched in terms of products and reach, maybe those opportunities are not things that you can go for, and that's what you need to pay attention to. Once you've decided where your strengths are, what opportunities make sense to go for, you now have to ask the final question, how do I differentiate myself? How do I get customers to understand what makes me different than my competitors so they will want to choose me? So Walmart made a decision that it wanted to be the low-cost provider. So with that strategic positioning, it went ahead and created all kinds of different programs that would enable it to do it. So first, it does tremendous bargaining with manufacturers. If you read a book called Wall Smart, it focuses on how companies like Walmart do this. It could be used by anybody, where they use something called the opportunity loop. And the concept here is whenever they get a concession from a vendor on reducing the price of the cost, instead of using it as profit for the company, they actually use it to reduce even more the price of the product for the customer because they have figured out that drop in price actually increases volume sold, and that volume sold usually produces a net income that's larger than they would have had the other way, which encourages them to go put more pressure on and keep that loop going over and over and over again. The second option, and what they've also done is figured out ways of cutting costs. So, for example, many years ago, they came up with a very interesting program and it came not from money actually initially. It came from the fact that they were looking at the environment and realizing that when they make deliveries on trucks, they have a full truck going out, but it's an empty truck coming back. So clearly they're wasting when they're doing things like that. They're wasting environmental resources. So what they did is they decided to create a division of the company which actually finds other companies on the route and offers them at a very good discount shipping. And so the result is they become a shipper on the reverse trip back, therefore paying for them to come back and obviously providing a discount to any of the customers who work. All kinds of programs they do that. They offer $4 generic drug services for the same reason. That low-cost provider there may not be something they make money on, but it brings people into their store. And that's what you want to do. The second option is to say, no, it's not about cost. I want people to pay a premium price and I don't have to make it up in volume. I want people to appreciate the quality of my work, the workmanship, the quality, how I position it. An example of that we all know is Apple. It has built an ecosystem built around product differentiation. And what it does is it manages people to be able to do that. And there are other companies, Fortune that I'm thinking of Tiffany's, who are all not about price, but they're about product or service differentiation. People know what they're about and they're different. The third option, which is used in about 10% of companies, is focusing on a niche. In other words, it's a small part of the market that's not fundamental to the bigger part of the market, and therefore they can go after that part of it and do it effectively. So, for example, if you are a company that wants to get people's attention, and you go head to head with an existing company, you're in trouble. But if you go into something they're not in, it'll work. So think of it. You want to build an electric car and no one's really doing it, so then you decide I'm going to create a high-end one, not a Volt at 40,000 or a Leaf at 20,000 as two major manufacturers did, but a unique car that started at over 100,000. It's an expensive car, it's a classy car, and it has electric engines. That became a niche, and the goal was to grow that market so people could identify environmental with lifestyle satisfaction, knowing down the road they would drop the prices and be able to do it. And that's kept them competitive in terms of growing their market share every single year. Another example might be Nucor Steel. So American Steel was always a leader in the world until the 70s when the Japanese crushed us by changing how they produce steel and doing it for a fraction of the cost, and many, many American companies went bankrupt. Toward the end of that cycle, a new company came along called Nucor Steel. And what Nucor did, which is very interesting, is they decided they didn't want to go head to head where they knew they'd get knocked out. What they wanted to do is focus on providing a service in steel that no one else cared about. So they went out with scrap metal. Lowest cost, very little profit margin, and all the major players didn't care about it because who cares about not making pennies when they're making dollars? What they didn't realize was Nucor's strategy was to build very happy customers for that low end, and then from there grow and grow, and that's exactly what they did. So they moved one rung up the ladder each time, and again, the big players said, well, that's a low thing, not high profit, not big margins, we don't really care about it, until all of a sudden they became able with a lot of their customers to be able to try to go after bigger business, the same professional high quality steel people did. And today Nucor is number one in the country. And the final point what you need to do is you have to design a coordinated plan that harnesses your energies because you really got to look at all of your people. So let's take Zappos. Zappos made this decision that it wanted to get into a business where what was it going to do? It was going to provide the highest level of customer service so people would feel good about the product and not worry about what would be normally on their mind. So they started with shoes. And what they did is they said nobody wants to have a shoe that doesn't fit. So no one's going to come and buy it online if they're going to have to take the pain trying to figure out what their right size is, order one, find out it doesn't work, send it back. Too much work. So their whole strategy was to say we will pay for all the shipping. And as a result of that payment for the shipping, you get the shoes. And if you don't like them, you can return it. So people would buy 20 shoes, bring them, and then they keep maybe two or three and send the rest of it back. And their business model was set up to be able to say, we can afford to do it because we charge a little bit more. And that covers the additional shipping costs. So again, you need to have a coordinated plan. If you don't, then you can make the same kind of mistake, for example, that Kmart did in the 1990s when they decided they wanted to try to offer their same low prices that Target did, except for the fact that their business model meant they were paying more. So the result is if their expenses were higher, they couldn't make the same profit and they had to declare bankruptcy. And that's the implementation point. You've got to be able to resolve what is it we can do and what is it we can't do. Can we find the right kind of people? Can we promote the talent that we need so that they can handle what we're doing? There's a phenomenal book, What Really Works, that focuses. It's a meta study. It means a study of studies that ask questions on what works and what doesn't work in companies' strategy, and it came to the conclusion of something called the 4+2 equation. What four things that every winning company over a 10-year period, by the way, so it was a really long study to figure this out, need to work, and what additional two things do out of another four do almost every one of these companies have. And one of them was recruiting the right people and promoting them. Now, not every company cares about that, but if you're a company that wants to keep your employees for a long period of time because it's cheaper to keep than to farm out and get a new employee, then it makes sense to do that. What are the kinds of systems and policies? Again, Kmart didn't use a system of buying low cost. The result was it was then selling at a lower price and paying a higher expense, and the result was they didn't make a profit. And what's your organizational model? This is an area of specific interest to me because the model of a company, like a culture, the organizational model is part of that culture. It demonstrates what the priorities, the values, the concerns, the relationships between your employees are going to be, and therefore choosing the right one makes sense. If you follow our blog on Presentation Excellence Group, there are a number of articles we've written about it. I'm mentioning that because in January, the newest one that I just finished last week will be published, so you can read it there, about a new way of looking at it someone else has come up with. I think what's very exciting is since 1969, new models have been coming out. Haven't been many, 3 or 4, but they offer really new ways of doing things, especially for a global virtual economy. And finally, ask the question, how are we doing? Look at financial KPIs, which are key performance indicators. Are we doing as well as we should? Are they customer focused? Is this the kind of thing customers care about? And the key thing for us to understand as we move into the next section right now, what is a competitive advantage? A competitive advantage is not written from the perspective of the company. It is purely like a brand written and thought about from the customer point of view. If the customer doesn't perceive better mileage, better experience, better quality, doesn't matter whether you put in more money to do it or not, they're not going to buy it. So always remember the KPIs have to be focused from them. Is their net promoter score going to be higher? Are more people going to buy it? Are they going to tell more people about it? Are they going to reuse it more often, etc.? And then always have someone who evaluates it. So one of the critical parts I do with our clients is at the very beginning, as we lay out our model, we define what metrics we want to use and implement little procedures to collect some of that data from the very beginning through the entire process. We have baseline data, etc., so that we can be the best we can be. And that's really the goal. One tool you might want to use in conceptualizing how to do it is something called the Open Systems Model. It basically says the following. Any company, it doesn't matter what it is, starts with inputs. Those are the resources we talked about, the capabilities, the people, the money, the plant that you have. You bring it all together by management, who generally reports to the COO or president within a company, and they do the throughputs or the processes. In other words, they do what you do. You manufacture a car. You provide customer service, you build software, you teach people at universities, things like that. And when you get finished, you produce outputs. And those outputs are very important. There are, in our view, two models to that. There are immediate outcomes. So I always explain to my students, I take a bunch of high school students and some money and a classroom and books and other tools. And 4 years later, we produce college graduates. Now, that's what the immediate outcome is, but from a long-term outcome, which is what we really want to look at, longer-term outcome or impact, the question is, are these people getting good paying jobs? Are they happy in their jobs? Have they chosen a job and that's appropriate for their skills? Do they stay there long? Do they grow? What's their rate of growth? All of those are the issues I would be measuring if I were running a university, for example, and that's what goes. And we know that works because feedback is the negative and positive people say, but the best feedback is when an alumni makes a giant donation to his school because it's helped him or her get a great job. And that money, that's one part of the feedback, goes back to the inputs because it's the money you might be using there. So it's important to do that. I give you the management box on top consisting of a CEO, COO, president. Ever since Sarbanes-Oxley came along many years ago, it became very clear that management shouldn't have all three roles in one person or two roles, COO and a president very often the same, but that actually the chairman of the board, who these people report to, which is the board of directors, the top administrative function for the whole company, should really have someone who's a CEO, which is focusing on the big picture, the external analysis, the competitive environment, whereas the COO or president focusing on how we convert those inputs through the throughputs and processes to becoming effective outputs. So it's an easy model to use to help you understand what you're doing. And that finally leads us now to this following point. If I've done all of that, I can build a good strategy. The problem is if I'm McDonald's and I build burgers and you're Burger King or you're Shake Shack, how am I going to compete against you? And what am I going to do when Chipotle comes out? Okay, or Subways or other kinds of fast food product companies that are out there. Each of them has a strategy to provide a quality food at different price levels with different experiences and different conveniences. And so if an identical, almost identical company comes, it's a rival. So for Burger King, Wendy's, and McDonald's are very much rivals, okay? And so the result is they basically feed off each other, and none of them have a sustainable competitive advantage over the others. And that's why you see them growing in different levels. When I grew up, Burger King was always number two. It did not have a consistent set of executive management leadership, as did, for example, McDonald's, and the net result is it dropped to number three, and Wendy's took over number two. But increasingly, because the food's not changing all that much, the price point's important. It's catering to a slightly different demographic. Other competitors, whether it's about burgers or something else, are always out there. So we came up with this concept we call a commanding strategy, which is an asymmetric, sustainable competitive advantage. It's that advantage you can have over your competitor that sustains over a period of time. And the key to doing that is to make it asymmetric. What do we mean by that? That means your relative strengths are actually bearing against the competition's weakness. Now, they don't think it's a weakness, but if you do, you can be able to follow it. So, in other words, you figure out what is their weakness and what they're doing, etc. So, for example, if I am Walmart, I am selling in stores. So, one of the strengths is I've got stores all over the place, but that's also a weakness because if people decide they want to buy online, that space isn't necessary and becomes an expense that I have to absorb that I don't need. Whereas a company like Amazon that's virtual and doesn't have spaces in physical spaces can consistently operate in an environment where it can grow and never have to worry about bricks and mortar. That's it. So what's key here in any strategy is that you have to make a trade-off, but you even make more severe ones when you're trying to build a commanding strategy. So one last example, take David and Goliath. The real story, if you think about it, is really this way. Goliath is a giant. He's well armed. Notice he's got his armor on him and everything. And so he's totally protected. That's his strength. But one of the things that David looks at in doing that, he says, I cannot beat you with a suit of armor, and I cannot beat you with a sword like you have, and I cannot beat you with a shield because you've got bigger ones. I cannot win that game. But asymmetrically, you have no headgear. You're not protecting your head. That makes you vulnerable. If I can get your one spot where you might be weak, I might be able to actually win this. And so asymmetrically, each of them has a different tool. One is physical armor, and one of them is being agile and aiming at a very targeted area where there's susceptibility. And we all know the end of the David and Goliath story. So let's go to some companies that are examples of how they have used commanding strategies. You all recognize many of these logos, so I'm not going to mention them, but let's just go to some of the examples to see it. One of the ones that I like to talk about is TD Bank, because TD Bank is one of the first companies where we saw how they were actually using it in a smart way. So let's go back. Banking's been around for years. The biggest change that took place in bank is in the late 1990s when we went to online banking. There were people who reported then there's going to be a total demise, pretty much, of retail banking because everybody can do it online. If you're in the New York area, I'm not sure about the rest of the country, but on any popular corner, I'm on 32nd Street or Park Avenue, every corner has a bank. Okay, go to 42nd Street, 34th Street. It's amazing. They're all there. Why? Well, partly is retail banks want to be there for convenience, but they're not. And we'll talk about that in a minute. but they're there because by being in front of people, they're in marketing. So they actually use their physical space as a marketing tool. Okay, it's a different cost for doing it. The question is, are they there and convenient? TD Bank comes up with a different idea. First, by the way, Commerce Bank, which got bought by TD, which is a Canadian company, they bought them, and they said, they're not convenient for the small companies. And you know what? Those small companies, they really do need some additional services, like being around. Because you know what? The average company today doesn't work from 9 to 3, and you'd have to take off from work to get in there. People are coming in 24/7, especially in New York, or at different hours. So I'm in early in the morning before 7 and may not go home till 7. So the answer is if I wanted to go to a bank and I want to go after work or before work or on my way in and out, any other bank could meet my need. So they made a decision to offer retail services 7 days a week, and originally pretty many hours. They've cut back a little bit, but the essence of it is it's close to 12 hours, on weekdays. That was a competitive advantage because they offered something someone didn't have it. But was it a commanding strategy? The answer is yes. Why? Because one of the keys to being able to offer more people to stand in their companies to provide customer service meant that if they provided the same range and services and they had to hire the same quality of people to work there, their expenses would be larger than their competitors and they would lose. But if they limited the number of services that they provided by this core team that's providing the retail service so that they had fewer people, not very few people, but people who are less expensive, then they could take that extra expense that they've saved and amortize it by having more people at other hours. In other words, it was possible for them to be able to be available 12 hours a day and on weekends because they were paying less money. So what happens is they started stealing market share from Chase and Citicorp and Citibank and Capital One and all these other banks. One of the issues that we all were worried about is, are these other banks going to say, you know what, we can expand the number of hours too? But they didn't. And that's how you know it's a competitive advantage. So, and a commanding strategy. Because they knew if they're paying their average worker 40, 50% more salary because they're selling more products and they can't therefore stretch them on a Sunday when very few people would buy those additional products, then it didn't make sense for them. And so as we watch in New York, there's been really very little expansion of hours. Since TD Bank made excess services more popular for these companies to work with, and that makes the real difference. So the result is they're able to do it. So they made a trade-off, and the trade-off was convenience versus fewer services, and also they give lower interest rates. So between lower interest rates, fewer services, they're saving on that end, they can afford to offer more convenience. Another example is Walmart. We've mentioned it before. Now, part of it comes from the model. They instead of to be able to become low cost, they had to rethink how do we become low cost. And one of the things they did different than Target and Kmart, and they, by the way, were all started in the same year, 1962, within 6 months of each other, is instead of focusing on separate companies, each store is a different company, and then servicing them, they focused on building a network, which included logistics serving distribution centers that would be able to service these people less expensively because of the strategic location of all the stores and the centers, and then figuring out a way to also keep costs down at all other ends by one reducing, putting pressure on the suppliers. I mentioned the opportunity loop, which allows them to provide the savings to customers. And as a result, they continue to grow, starting to use this model at the end of the 80s, beyond that of any other company, becoming the single biggest company in that retail area. And therefore, they set now the standards for low cost discounting. And one of the things you'll find about companies committed to sustainable competitive advantages, or we call it again commanding strategies, is they really do want to set the standard for what they're doing. So they offer lower prices, but they're giving their customers service, and they're making a decision they can afford to do that through everything they're doing, including providing less quality service than, let's say, a Fortune or a Macy's might provide. Zappos, we mentioned again as an example, because you can't try the shoes on. They decided they would offer you free shipping and free returns, and they created this awesome culture of customer service so that even though it's still a little bit inconvenient, have to pick out a lot of shoes that said some Mac. They're still okay to do that because the answer is you felt so good about the company if you ever have a customer service questions. What's great about it is they've used customer service as a marketing tool, which is again a commanding strategy. So they have this image of excellent stories that are just incredible, and I can share many of them with you. But in essence, is they tell stories of how Zappos people have gone out of their way to do things no other company would do. And they actually even provide facility tours for people who want to come and see them and see how great the customer service department is and how they work. And what they actually do to be able to make sure they have the right people culture wise is they actually have a program where what happens is they train you, and at the end of the 2 week training they offer you money to leave. So you have to be willing to give up money. I think it's up to $3,000 now before you would get a job there beyond the initial training period. So awesome service means they're not going to be the lowest cost provider. And you should know there are other companies that are cheaper in shoes and will even provide free shipping, but not at the same level as they position themselves. Dell is an example of that in the 1980s. It had a great idea. It said, what we're going to do is provide you with computers. We're going to put the pieces together. And as a result of that, we don't have to spend a lot of money on inventory. So any company whose model was built around inventory right away walked in with a disadvantage. The second part is they put it online so that if you did it, you actually bought your computer from a cash point of view before they actually even started assembling it. Contrast that with Compaq or HP, where what happened was the companies would produce the computer, send it to a reseller who would then send it to the stores from which we bought our companies, and therefore had to actually pay for the computer 60 days before they ever got paid for it. That provided them with additional money. That additional money, the ability to customize, the ability to put it together at a low cost, gave them a competitive advantage over their others, which is why they skyrocketed at that point to being number one. Interesting question was then why are they not number one now? And the answer was over time, other people learned those advantages and then they had some missteps. And so the key again in strategy is to have your executive team looking at all the things because as people do learn from you, and they will, you need to always stay one step ahead. And that's a commanding strategy. Apple is a differentiation point of view of doing the same thing. Its goal was never to provide you with an iPhone or an iMac or an iTablet, but the concept was a holistic ecosystem where all these pieces work together and work. Think about the difference. In the for early days of the 80s, when people bought computers, you bought Microsoft software, you bought a different kind of color board, you put it into a different computer made with a monitor made by a different player. All of this required system integration and therefore many potential problems. Contrast that to Apple, which always focused on great design and holistically putting it together to make it work. That net result is what really made the difference. And you have to remember the iMac came out at the end of the 90s, and that made the big difference for the company. Coffee is another example, consumer product that's really being offered at a much lower price, but it came up with a simple mission when it first started, and that was to create a third place. That's how they viewed it, a third place where people could relax besides home and the office, and they could socialize, they could do work, they could enjoy themselves, and then built a story around it. They could build a brand that Joe's Diner could never offer. Okay, and they positioned it as a much higher end coffee, and people would say, why are they paying it? Because psychologically they were communicating this is an affordable indulgence. It's not coffee. You work hard, you deserve to treat yourself. In fact, if the economy's down, you're going to want to still take care of yourself, and so you may not make this trip that you wanted to take, but you can eat out a little bit better and have great coffee every morning. So what you're trying to do is providing a brand value that makes people feel good about what they're doing, and that's been the growth for Starbucks. And their repositioning when Howard Schultz came back in was around making sure that quality standard was met. And as you know, it's a high multiple, high volume, and it's a great company. Enterprise is an interesting company with a strategy that it built that would be different than others, and then continuing to add strategies to give it a commanding strategy. So, for example, in the early days of cars, before Enterprise was invented, rental cars, what it did is most people did like Avis and Hertz and Budget and National. They focused on either business travelers or they focused on individuals using it for vacations and stuff like that. So they kind of chose those industries. And they would rent out new cars from fleets from the different manufacturers and offer them. And after a year or so, they would then give up the lease, and then companies would then recycle their cars, and they'd have a new car. Enterprise, in looking, and that's the key, is it's always your homework in the external environment, noticed that there were a number of people who also needed a car because their cars were in accidents. And they discovered that that was a pretty sizable market, and this wonderful service of that Budget or Hertz or Avis would offer really didn't help them, because the answer is, how could I go pick up a new car while my car is being repaired in the shop? Because I don't have a car. And recognizing again the consumer's need for something, they came up with this idea that instead of just reimbursing for them renting a car, what they would do is offer these people the ability to get picked up by Enterprise and be able to pick up the car. So I don't have a car, it's in the shop, I'm inconvenienced, I call Enterprise, they pick me up, they bring me to their place, and I get the car that I'm looking for. That meant they're going to position themselves completely differently. Again, differentiation. So instead of focusing on being in airports for the business and traveler, they focused on being in cities and being around where people live so that they could be able to use the cars. What they also did is decided to create a different standard. So the people who work for the company are raised at a very high quality customer service standard. If you've ever used it, you probably know what I'm talking about. And the third part is they also decided that they could make more money to feed all of this by changing the car model. Instead of leasing cars for 1 to 2 years as the competitors do, they made a decision to buy cars. And then after they're taken care of a little bit better, because everyone cares about it now, they actually sell it into the used car markets, and that actually is another profit center for them. So again, building on what might be other strengths, which they saw as a weakness, allowed them to grow. Zipcar is one more example that makes this kind of point. Zipcar, as you well know, looked at the car rental market and said, you know something, not everybody wants to buy a car. Rent a car for a whole day, and we could maybe break this. And this is where this entire economy now has changed, between the sharing economy. And they decided, how could we do that? They segmented the market, people who don't have cars, okay, but only want to use it for a couple of hours, and decided going externally how to use technology so people could pick them up themselves, so they didn't have to pay a lot of money for parking in retail establishments. And they changed the entire model to do it, and they created a new industry. Hertz later on tried to compete with them with Connect, which is a service they still have, but Zipcar maintains the lead. If you know now, Avis finally bought them because they realized this was a model that's going to grow, just like TD Bank bought Commerce Bank. And I teach it at Baruch College, which is part of the CUNY here in New York. And I always try to make a point we could build our own company. So imagine you're in the burger company, and I say to people, and you can do this in your own company. How does our company, whatever it is, in this case Baruch Burgers, build a commanding strategy to compete with the big chains? Remember, they're never going to have the scale and quality, quantity of capabilities of a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Wendy's or even a Shake Shack, which had to go public to raise more money to do it. And the answer is, with the lack of a national brand, though eventually we now rename it University Burgers, how could they do other things? Well, they changed their product line to really be customized to their student populations, only healthy vegetarian products. They create charge accounts that are connected to the IDs of the customer, and they have delivery schedules that actually meet the students outside the schools downstairs during their breaks. Okay, so this is the kind of business that a Burger King and a McDonald's would never go into, and therefore it becomes a business that could be successful in New York and eventually nationwide. So these examples are designed to give you an idea of how you could take your company, go through strategic analysis, and eventually come up with a program that gives you a competitive advantage that actually could be sustainable. If you have it, you can dominate the competition. And honestly, that's what it's all about. So as you know, and that's what we're going to focus on next week, leadership. It's all about saying that's what we want to do. So what you need to do is start by getting your leaders together. We call it, again, a strategic leadership advance, where you sit, you're pulling yourself out of the company to really work on the company as opposed to in the company, and ask the question, why are we around? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to do it? How do we really meet the full needs of our customers? It's really amazing because I work with so many people who really don't have the pulse of the customer. And then what you need to do is when you've gotten the how, the what, the why, the how, and the what of your company together, and then you do it, you need to use it, you need to explain it and inspire, empower, and mobilize everyone in your team to see, visualize that customer and know who they're going to serve and feel good about doing that. Now, what makes those kinds of leaders better than sort of leaders who just want to be managers, who aren't figuring out what to do, but just doing it as well as they can by following someone else's lead? Yeah, our experiences, they're very smart. They have high informational IQ. They're constantly looking at that external information, internal information, understanding the customers, understanding the competition, etc. They have people with great communication skills, which, as you know, is where the beginning of all of our work in this company comes from, because we're part of the Presentation Excellence Group, which is started by Presentation Excellence, where over 5,000 corporate communicators worked with us on developing winning presentations. And finally, to be able to take charge of their ideas, they have to have the courage of their convictions. And that's not always easy because everyone else is going to tell you to do something different. So if you've got a leader with that kind of commitment and you're going through the strategies, you can build one. How? You analyze your business, both in terms of the model, the external, the internal. You have to decide what makes our business special. Is it going to be a low cost? Is it going to be a product differentiation? Are we going like Tesla after a special market? Okay, you need to clearly understand why your product is worth more money and figure out how you can build it in a way that's going to keep your costs down, especially if you've made a decision to be the low cost provider. And then if you want to not go after the main market, you can go after a unique niche and go after them. Then what you have to do is say, okay, the strategies I want to use, are they something that can be stolen, copied by my competitors? Or can I find a way to building one that builds asymmetrically on what they think are their strengths, but is a weakness when they try to counterattack me? Again, if their cost of labor is so much higher and they can't compete, then they're not going to be able to compete, which is what TD Bank found. When Apple decided to charge more, as it does for all of its products, it does it because it offers a supportive ecosystem of all its products and services and a brand image that any of these other companies can't offer. And then if you have it, you now implement that plan, you evaluate it very carefully and constantly, a couple times a year, and then use these commanding strategies to get long-term growth. And with that, you will go ahead and be able to dominate the competition. And with that, I want to thank you for attending today's program. My contact information is here. Again, I'm Jerry Kahn, and you can call me at any point. We're at the end of the hour, so there's 2 questions here, and I'll get back to you both later. Um, but if you have additional questions, feel free to email me or contact me. We're now beginning to put some of our blog, which is on the Presentation Excellence Group website, also on my personal LinkedIn, since I do a lot of the writing, and you're welcome to follow them there. And with that, I think I'm